Welcome to Fresh Thinking by Stone Optero. My name's Jan Graham and I'm a Principal Consultant with Stone Optero based here in Perth. Today we're going to have a bit of a history lesson and explore the genesis of the nickel industry in Australia. It's a fascinating story with some great lessons about luck, lateral thinking and persistence. My guest today is Ian Glacken, who's an Executive Consultant at Stone Optero based here in Perth. Welcome.
Jen.
Okay, so Ian, what is the significance of the date 28th of January 1966, which is just over 60 years ago now?
So 28th of January 1966 is the date that the first diamond hole drilled at Kambalda for nickel intersected ore. It intersected 2.7 metres downhole. It's 8.3% nickel. And very important because that was essentially the hole that the discovery that stimulated and generated the nickel industry in Australia. And the nickel in Australia is not so great these days, but in the past 30 or 40 years, it's been quite significant. So the company that drilled the hole was called Western Mining. We'll talk a bit more about Western Mining.
Okay, thank you. So what was the history leading up to the drilling of KD1? It wasn't a short history, was it?
No, it goes way back. And Kambalda, what I should say, Kambalda was the site of a gold mine in the early 20th century called Red Hill. So the actual township of Kambalda was gazetted, I think, in 1890 or something like that. So it wasn't just a nickel mining town. There was gold there, mining there previously. So there was a farmer from Quairading. His name was George Cowsill, and he was a bit of a prospector, and we would roam far and wide. And in the 40s and the 50s. And in the 50s, there was a bit of a uranium boom worldwide. And so Cowsill was prospecting in the Kambalda region on the edge of Lake Lefroy, which is a big salt lake. And he found some rocks that had a green mineral in them. And he was thinking, no, these green minerals were uranium bearing. So he collected a few of these minerals. And he sent them or took them to WA School of Mines in Kalgoorlie, which was about 60 kilometres up the road from Kambalda, and they were analysed. And they came to the attention of Roy Woodall. Roy Woodall, who's dead now, unfortunately, died a few years ago. Roy Woodall was the Assistant Chief Geologist of Western Mining Corporation, WMC, which is a gold mining company in those days. This was in the 60s. And Roy, who had studied at Berkeley in California, and so he was aware of the nickel industry in Canada, which was quite substantial. So he recognized them for what they were, which was oxidized nickel sulfides. And in fact, they were from what we call a gossan. A gossan is a weathered cap of a sulfide ore body. So Woodall, he started the process to follow up these samples, and that led to a phase of mapping over this Kambalda region. And we talk about the Kambalda Dome. Kambalda Dome is a hill, and it's also geologically speaking, it's a dome, a doubly plunging anticline. So what you need to understand is that in the 60s, 95% of the Western world nickel production came from Canada, specifically from the Sudbury region. And there was no nickel industry in Australia. There was a very big nickel mine in Russia, in Norilsk, which is still going. So absolutely no nickel mine. So as I said to you, Western Mining organised some mapping with some vacation students and one of their geologists, and they mapped to these contacts, and they found a few more of these gossans. So Roy Woodall got the permission to drill 3 holes at the cost of $22,000, which was quite a bit in the 1960s. And they started drilling KD1. So the way that works is K for Kambalda, D for drilling, 1 for the first hole. KD1 was drilled, started in December 1965, and on the 28th of January 1966 intersected nickel sulfides, and the rest is history. This basically kicked off the nickel industry in Australia, and within 10 years, nickel had been discovered at Leinster, at Mount Keith, at Windara, and later on in other places like Forestania and so on. So it became quite a big industry.
So after that initial discovery, things happen pretty fast?
Absolutely, and it's quite incredible. So the intersection, as I mentioned, was the 28th of January 1966, and within 5 or 6 months, in June 1966, they actually started sinking a shaft. So if you just let that sink in these days, if you drill a hole in January, would you ever get the permission or the money to sink a shaft 5 months later? You certainly wouldn't. So they completed the shaft in 1967. They started mining, and they also built a processor, a concentrator, a Kambalda, and the first concentrate was produced in March 1967. So, in other words, there was about 20 months from the discovery of the hole to the first concentrate.
Gosh,
so it's just pretty incredible. Now, Western Mining was a company that had been around since the 30s, and they were responsible for discovery of the Darling Range bauxite, which is a big discovery. But mostly they were a gold company. Now, how did this discovery affect Western Mining? Well, Western Mining had a few other discoveries. The main one that led to their growth was the discovery of Olympic Dam, which was a few years after that. But just in terms of market capitalization, at the start of the 60s, the market cap of Western Mining was about $4 million, $4.8 million. In 1999, for instance, the capitalization was $3.8 billion. So they grew quite significantly. And most of that growth came from the Kambalda region, but also from Olympic Dam. And just to put that in perspective, between 1967 and about 2014, the production from the Kambalda mines was about 52 million tons at 3%, which is about 1.6 million tons of nickel metal, which is quite substantial. So it was the start of what became quite a significant discovery.
Sounds it. And what was your part in this, Ian?
Well, my small part, I can't take any pay part in the discovery, but I arrived in Kambalda in the 1980s, and it was, in those days there was probably about 9 or 10 nickel mines, separate nickel mines, and these are spread over 4 or 5 main areas in the Kambalda region itself, and then to the further south, an area called Foster Jan, and then further south again, an area called Tramways, and there was also another area, Wijimolfa, which is a bit further to the south. But in that same region, I worked as a what was called a mine geologist in charge, and during those days, and I was there for the best part of 10 years. The nickel mines were discovered, and more nickel mines were found, and the nickel mining was quite substantial, but also the gold mining became quite substantial as well. As I said to you, there was gold mining at Kambalda in the early, the late part of the previous century, but the Kambalda gold mining thing really got started in the 80s and the 90s, and these days it's largely known as a gold mining camp. And probably the total inventory or the total endowment of the camp will be about 30-40 million ounces, so quite significant. And these days, in terms of the nickel mining, well, we don't have any nickel mines left there, and in fact, in the whole of Australia, there's just 1 or 2 nickel mines operating. That's mostly because of the price and the fact that most of the production's gone offshore to the Philippines, to Indonesia and New Caledonia, and it's largely lateritic nickel. So things have changed quite a bit.
So with it being the 60th year anniversary of KD1, how was the notable anniversary celebrated?
Well, it was celebrated, and one of my colleagues, a chap called Chris Banasic, who was the former chief geologist at Kambalda, actually went to huge trouble to organise a trip. And so about 20 geologists and 1 rogue mining engineer, hello Dave Morgan, went up to Kambalda for a weekend, or Kalgoorlie and Kambalda, and we visited the site, the plinth where the KD1 was drilled, and we looked at a few other things. We went to visit the Gossan and a few other things as well. Interestingly, of those geologists, there's about 20 of them. Some of them are company managing directors, chief executives, company chairman. Most of them retired. Some of them, like me, still in the game. So I'm hoping that with this podcast, when it's shown visually, we can show a couple of pictures. We've got a picture taken in January this year, and also another picture which I was involved in 1986, which was 40 years ago. And few of the people in that earlier photo are no longer with us. So, what's changed? Well, a lot of high vis. In the earlier days, we just wander up there in our shorts, and these days that's not possible. You have to get kitted out with all the high vis gear and so on. So things like that have changed. A lot more forms to fill out. Some things haven't changed. We had a celebratory lunch at the Kambalda Hotel, which is affectionately known as the Swinging Arms, and that hasn't changed much in the last 40 years. So very interesting and well celebrated. But I think the important thing is it was a very historically very significant hole to be drilled.
It does sound like it. Well, thanks so much for those insights, Ian. It must have been an exciting time way back when.
It was, and speaking about mine geology, in those days it was very hands-on. All of the nickel was won by air legs, by hand mining, and the mine geologist's job was to go to every individual stope once or twice a week, visit the miners and tell them where the nickel was. Sometimes it disappeared, so you were certainly living on your wits. But it was very interesting, yes.
So thanks, Ian. If you enjoyed listening to today's podcast, please subscribe to our podcast, Fresh Thinking.